Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us this evening. This is John McDougall. I am the event coordinator here at Murder by the Book, coming to you with another live virtual event. But before we get into it and bring Linda and Sarah out, I just wanted to make a couple quick store announcements, let everybody know what has been going on. If you did not see last week's email newsletter, you will have missed the announcement that we are going to start hosting some in-store events again in September. We'll be starting again on September 5th with Miranda James. We've got William Kent Kruger, I think that's September 13th. And then we also have Lisa Jewell and David Liss on the schedule for September 7th and 8th as well. We're hoping, we've talked with authors, we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable. So we're hoping that they're going to be kind of as normal as our events were pre-COVID. That is our plan today. As everybody out there knows, over the last year, things can change quickly. So that is, as I said, our plan for today. And our general disclaimer is we're keeping an eye on things like vaccination rates, these new variants that are popping up. So if we need to change things or switch things up just to make sure everybody's safe before then, we will. But we're so excited to be able to have some author events in store again. As you have probably heard me say multiple times, we are open for browsing, so we hope that you will come in and visit us. If you're still not getting out yet and you want a book fix, but you don't want to come into the store, or if you're in a hurry and you just need to pick something up, you can always give us a call when you pull into the parking lot. We're always happy to run stuff out to you. We did that pre-pandemic. We had a customer named Donna who shopped at the store for years and years and years and had never set foot in. She would call in the morning and say, hey, this is what I want. And then on her way home from work, she would call and say, hey, I pulled up into the parking lot, and we would just run a bag out to her. So we're always happy to do that. We've got lots of great stuff coming up. Tomorrow night, Meg Gardner is going to be chatting with Jeff Abbott and Hillary Davidson about their new releases. And then on Thursday night, Alex Segura is going to be chatting with S.A. Cosby about his new book that's just come out. And then on Friday, we're going to be chatting with Dan Fesserman and Laura Lippman. So we hope that you guys will check back and see what we've got going on this week. While we're chatting this evening with Linda and Sarah, if you have questions for either one of them, you can post those in the comments on Facebook or in the live chat on YouTube, and we will leave some time to get to them. So now I'm going to bring them out. We are going to start with Sarah Stewart Taylor. How are you tonight, Sarah?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks so much for having us, John.
Thanks for joining us again. So we were lucky enough to do an event with Sarah last year. I feel like maybe early days in the pandemic when The Mountains Wild came out.
Yes. Yeah, I think we were all still sort of feeling our way in this virtual environment. But it was a great event, and I so appreciated the support and all you guys have done this year to keep getting books into people's hands. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels like that was a lifetime ago. So if you guys want to hear Sarah talk a little bit more about the first book in her series, The Mountains Wild, you can always check that out on the YouTube channel. It has just come out in paperback. But her new book, A Distant Grave, which is the second in the Maggie D'arcy series, just came out on June 22nd. And so Sarah Stewart Taylor is the author of the Sweeney St. George series and the Maggie D'arcy series. She grew up on Long Island in New York and was educated at Middlebury College in Vermont and Trinity College in Dublin. She lived in Dublin, Ireland in the mid-90s, and she now lives with her family on a farm in Vermont where they raise sheep and grow blueberries. We're also excited tonight to have Linda Castillo with us. How are you tonight, Linda?
Hi, John. I'm doing good. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for doing this. Congratulations on Pub Day.
Thank you very much.
We were just saying before we went live, for all of you who are viewing us out there, so Linda has been to the store for pretty much almost every book, it feels like. So it feels like it's been forever since we've gotten to see her. So I'm glad that we were able to do this virtually today to talk about the new book in the series.
Me too.
And I forgot to mention, so both Linda and Sarah have been kind enough to sign copies of their books for us. They are making their way from the authors back to us. So we will have signed copies of Fallen and A Distant Grave in the next few days. So in a little bit, I will drop a link in the chats if you want to order signed copies of those. So as we said, Linda's new book, Fallen, just came out today. Linda Castillo was the author of the New York Times and USA Today bestselling Kate Burkholder series set in the world of the Amish. The first book, Sworn to Silence, was adapted into a Lifetime original movie called An Amish Murder, starring Neve Campbell as Kate Burkholder. Castillo is the recipient of numerous industry awards, including a nomination by the International Thriller Writers for Best Hardcover, the Mystery Writers of America Sue Grafton Memorial Award, and an appearance on the Boston Globe's shortlist for Best Crime Novel. In addition to writing, Castillo's other passion is horses. She lives in Texas with her husband and is currently working on her at work on her next book. So as I mentioned, if you guys have questions for Linda and Sarah while we're chatting tonight, please post those in the comments. But for now, I'm going to pop away and let these two ladies get to it, and I will see y'all in just a little bit.
All right. Thank you, John.
Thanks, John.
I love that. Okay, so we have horses, blueberries, and sheep. It doesn't get any better than that.
Yeah, we were kind of covering the agricultural ground.
That's right.
It's good.
That's right.
East and west.
East and west. That's correct. So you're in Vermont, Sarah, and you spent some time in Ireland in the 90s.
Yep.
And you currently live in Vermont?
I do.
Okay. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about the book? And
sure, yeah. So A Distant Grave is the second book in the Maggie D'arcy series. The first, The Mountains Wild, came out just about this time last year. Mm-hmm. And in The Mountains Wild, Maggie the book starts in one time period and then it sort of switches back and forth. Mm-hmm. But in the 1993 time period, she's a recent college graduate. And she is working in her uncle's Irish bar on Long Island when her beloved cousin goes missing in Ireland. And she has to go over as sort of the representative of the family to see if she can find her. And ultimately, she can't find any trace of her. And then 23 years later, she's become a homicide detective and she's the divorced mother of a daughter. And new evidence is found and she sort of has to go back and try to solve the case once and for all. And in the second Maggie book, she and her daughter are sort of dealing with the events of the first book. Mm-hmm. When the body of an unidentified man is found on the beach in a very wealthy Long Island beach community. And Maggie has to sort of peel away the layers of this guy's identity and try to figure out who he is. And those layers point her to Ireland again. And she investigates there and then back on Long Island and, eventually comes to some terrible revelations about this man's life. So that is A Distant Grave.
I have to tell you, I loved The Mountains Wild, and I'm about halfway through the second book, and you were right. Your prose are beautiful. And as a writer, when I read a mystery, I usually try to analyze, what do I love about this mystery? And I usually end up with your books. I get so involved that I sort of lose track of the analyzing part, and I just enjoy the heck out of the book. So one of the things I did notice about your books is, one of the things that really shines through, and forgive me if I've asked you this before, because we did an event together last year, your love of Ireland. You have such passion for Ireland, and the picture you paint of Ireland is so vivid, and your love for Ireland comes through so vividly. How is that? I mean, why?
Thank you.
Right about that?
I do love Ireland. It's a hugely important place to me, and I love it. I'm fascinated by it. I'm intrigued by the history and the culture and the writing, of course. And it's interesting because I was thinking about in your books how your love of your community, of that part of Ohio and these Amish farms and the landscape also shines through so strongly for me. And I was thinking about how it's so interesting as crime writers, because we have these places that we love and that we think are beautiful or interesting, and then we make absolutely horrible things happen in them. And to me, it's such a it's such a balancing act. And how do you when you love a place, you show it in all of its in all of its humanity for the people, and in all, all of its bright corners and dark corners. And
yes.
And I think that's something that I love about your books. And so I'm glad you asked that question.
Well,
but I have a lot more questions to ask you about your wonderful book, but maybe this is a good time for you to tell us about Fallen, and then I have a couple things I want to ask you too.
Sure. Well, I have to tell you, I'm really excited. It's hard for me to believe that this is actually the 13th book in the series. And it just seems like, yesterday that I started with that first book. But Kate Burkholder, I think what makes Kate Burkholder sort of a unique heroine is that she was, she was born Amish, and she left the fold after an event in her life. As a teenager, she decided to leave and, travel to Columbus, Ohio, which is actually very close to Holmes County, where Painter's Mill is located. And eventually she found her way into law enforcement. And a few years later, her roots started calling, and the town council in Painter's Mill, knowing that Kate is Amish and that she's fluent in Dutch and Pennsylvania Dutch, asked her if she would like to be the chief of police. The chief of police had just retired, and Kate accepted. She was ready to go home as an English woman, not Amish. And so that's sort of how that character started. That's sort of her roots. In Fallen, the story opens with with the discovery of a body. I do that. I find myself doing that a lot. One of the words, Sarah, that's it's funny what you were just saying. One of the words I find that people use to describe Amish country and Painter's Mill and whatnot is bucolic. And we really do bring a lot of terrible things to these towns that we love. They're peaceful places with great people. And yet we find a way, because we write crime fiction, we find a way to bring crime into these towns. And so Kate discovers, there's a murder at a motel. Kate, being the chief of police in this small town, is called to the scene. And, she goes in and, she realizes that she knew this young woman. She used to babysit for this woman. Mm-hmm. And she sort of, Kate kept tabs on this woman growing as this, girl grew up into a woman. And she was somewhat of a rabble rouser. I mean, she was sort of a free spirit. And, she got herself into a lot of trouble. She sort of lived life full bore. And she also, one of the things I tried to do in this book is I drew some parallels between Kate and this victim, whose name was Rachel Schwartz. Rachel left the Amish way, moved to the big city. And one of the first questions that occurs to Kate is, why did she come back? Right. And this murder, just because of the nature of the murder, Kate knows that it was a very, it was a murder of passion. So it was likely somebody who knew her or had known her. And so this book is sort of Kate's journey as she's looking through this woman's past and trying to figure out, why she was back in Painter's Mill and who would do something so terrible to a young woman.
One of the things that I really loved about Fallen was the way that you sort of paired Kate and Rachel. I thought that was so well done that Kate sees herself in Rachel, and she almost sees another outcome for herself, and it sort of made me think a lot about Kate's own choices and the way that she had returned home, so different from the way Rachel returned home. Was that something that you sort of were conscious of as you started writing, or was that one of those things that kind of appeared as the book got going?
Sometimes those kinds of things happen organically as you're writing. In this case, I did it purposefully. And if you read, the earlier books, Kate was a very imperfect person, and she was troubled, and she was the victim of a crime as a teenager, and that affected her. And she got into some trouble, mostly minor things as a teenager. And, as a writer, one of the things that bestowed upon me was it gave Kate a lot of room for growth. And I think over the period of 13 books, she has grown a lot. She's grown into a much more balanced and mature person. But, when Kate, having known this young woman who was murdered so brutally, she knows the parallels are there. Right. And I think that's one of the things that motivates Kate. Rachel wasn't perfect, and she made some mistakes, and maybe Rachel wasn't always a good person. And even so, she didn't deserve what happened to her. She deserves justice. And I think that those parallels between Kate and Rachel, I think that's one of the driving forces that drives Kate to investigate this crime with so much passion.
Yeah, I just thought that was so well done, and added, it's a wonderful plot, but that added so much to the plot, I think.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I have this urge to sort of pick your brain about the fact that this is your 13th series book. And just to say, some advice. But I'll refrain from doing that right now. But what I am really interested in is hearing what are your favorite things about writing a series, and what are the things that you find challenging in writing a series?
Well, I will answer your second question first. One of the things that I find most challenging in writing a series is keeping it fresh. I think that, readers, when they pick up a mystery, and particularly when they pick up a mystery that's part of a series, they have very specific expectations, reader expectations. And I think it's our job as crime fiction writers, as mystery writers, to meet those expectations. And if we are able to do it, surpass those expectations. Yeah. And so I'm always looking for ways to keep the books fresh. A couple of ways that I've done that. In fact, the book that I'm working on right now, that's going to be, you probably know that your head is not in the book. Right. You're already in summer of 2022. Right.
I'm finishing that book up right now.
Yes. And, change of locale is one of the things that I do, or maybe sort of a fish out of water type thing. And just a different perspective or a different type of mystery. Those are some of the things that I try to do to keep it fresh. Some of the things that I really love is I like seeing the growth of the characters. In the very first book, Kate and her love interest, John Tomasetti, who is he's a sort of a state agent. He's the Bureau of Criminal Investigation. That's sort of the state version of the FBI. And he was in a very, very bad place. He was, popping prescription drugs. He was drinking. He had just lost his wife and 2 little girls to a career criminal. And Kate wasn't exactly in a very good place, because that first book had to do with this crime that happened to her when she was a teenager. And so she was doing a lot of juggling that she couldn't necessarily let anybody else know about. And when I look back at that book and I look at where they are now, and there have been moments of growth for those 2 characters. And I think they were so damaged early on by the things that had happened to them in their backstories. And they've come such a long way. And it makes me happy as a writer to see, even though they're dealing with, murder, and they're trying to solve cases and whatnot, when it comes to their personal lives and their own place, their own place as being, human beings, they're in a good place now. And it was gratifying to see that happen, to see it sort of play out.
Yeah. I mean, that's always one of the questions with a series is, if the romance works out for the characters too soon, do you get rid of tension? Do you get rid of suspense?
Yes.
And how do you handle that? But I have to say that after all they've been through, it felt right that they have at least a moment of peace and happiness here.
Yes.
And I think some of my favorite series do that. They put their characters through a lot, but then they grant them moments of peace and safety too, and that balance can be quite wonderful, I think.
Yes, I think so. And it's kind of a funny side story, but I did a Zoom event with a book club about a month ago. And I asked this book club, so what's your vote? Shall I marry off Tomasetti and Kate? They said no. And,
right.
Sarah, I don't know if you know this, but I actually started my career in the romance genre. I wrote romantic suspense for several years for a couple of different publishing houses. And, I always thought that once that commitment is made, that you're going to lose that tension, that tension that is just there before that commitment takes place. But I think, now that I'm older, not that much older, but a little older, there are other things that happen that's even better. And I think, as we mature and as relationships mature, it's not necessarily, a bad thing. It's, interesting things happen. And I think in the case of Kate and Tomasetti, I think they've got a lot of good things in store.
Yeah. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Should we check and see if we have any questions to answer here? If not, I'm sure we both have questions for each other. We can keep asking.
Sure.
All right. So we have a couple in there, but for everybody watching, if you do have questions, definitely pop some more in the chat. So I wanted to ask Linda, you mentioned that this is book number 13 in the series. So what is the first book in the series? And do you think people can jump in here, or do you think that they need to go back and read the first one?
The first book in the series was Sworn to Silence, and it was published in 2009. And I hear different things. I'm biased because I'm the writer. But, I do read reviews. I do go out to Goodreads, and I, go out to Amazon, and I sort of look because I like to know what readers are thinking and how they feel, good and bad, about the book. Most people say that you get more out of a series if you begin with that first book, because you get the backstories of the characters, and you sort of know what happened from the get-go. But, even if you look at Fallen, I've got reviews out on Goodreads and Amazon already. And one of the nice reviewers out there said, this is my first Linda Castillo book, and it was perfectly fine as a standalone. So I think it really just depends on your preference as a reader, and if you love the current book, you can always go back and get caught up on things.
So what is your preference as a reader, Linda? Are you I'm going to start with the first book in the series, or will you pick something up in the middle?
I'll probably pick something up in the middle. Yeah. I'll pick something up in the middle. If that's the first book that I discover and I want to read it, I'm going to read that book first. And then if I love it, or if I'm really intrigued, I'm going to go back to the first book and I'm going to read it.
And how about you, Sarah?
Same for me. Yeah, I'll often jump into a series, because the premise of a particular book sounds really fascinating, or, or someone will recommend it to me, or for whatever reason, I'll just pick it up. But then it's funny, I always do try to go back and read from the beginning, because I really love that slow build, that, the characterization that takes place over years, and to really see how relationships evolve and how characters evolve as investigators. I think that's one of the pleasures of a crime fiction series. And so yeah, I'll go back and do that. And it's always fun too to, when an author who I love starts a new series, and I can get in on the ground floor. An example would be Anne Cleves, who, I love Anne Cleves, and her new series, the first one just came out last year or the year before, and the new one's about to come out. So it's kind of fun to feel, to be there right at the beginning of that new series.
So you mentioned kind of the characters' kind of growth as investigators. So can you guys talk a little bit about the investigative research process in writing, and like how you figure out how somebody would solve a crime? Let's start with Sarah.
Sure. So I've given myself sort of an added challenge in this regard, because I have Maggie investigating in her role as a homicide detective in the Suffolk County Police Department on Long Island. And then I also have her, of course, involved in investigations in Ireland. And so I needed to research both law enforcement systems, and they're quite different. Ireland has a national police force, the Garda Síochána, and many functions are centralized, and it's just a very different approach than our American systems, which are highly localized and regionalized. And so, I found myself really fascinated by those differences, and I really enjoyed doing that research. But the getting everything I needed about crime investigation in Ireland was tough. I was lucky enough to be able to talk to some guards who were able to answer questions for me. And then I do things like I follow the Facebook accounts of the guards and of the Garda Training College and things like that. I actually find, I don't know if you do things like that as well, Linda, but little things like that where you kind of get a sense for the sort of the atmosphere, the social atmosphere, and the just what it's like being in that law enforcement system. I think can be really helpful and kind of provide some context.
Yeah, that was actually one of my questions that I wanted to ask you. That must have been, it's sometimes it's difficult to know exactly, crime solving is a very complicated and very scientific endeavor these days. And for you to do that, a police procedural on a local level in Long Island and then also in Ireland, that is really pretty awesome. And so, as far as, the Kate Burkholder books, sometimes I just wing it. I did graduate. I went to a couple of citizens police academies, and which was very, very helpful. That's kind of a 12-week course where, the police department takes you through different departments within the department, everything from patrol to child abuse to homicide and crimes against persons, the whole thing. And it was a really eye-opening experience for me. And I was able to make a few contacts. And when I do get stuck, when I'm working on trying to solve a crime that I don't know where to turn, I'm able to call on these guys. And one of the things that I have learned about police officers is they love to help in that sort of area. They love to share what they know. And that for a crime writer, that for me, that has been just invaluable.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we did bios, Sarah, we mentioned, that you had written the Sweeney St. George mysteries. And the last one of those came out in 2006. So there was a gap between that and you starting this series. So what surprised you the most about jumping back into publishing after not publishing for almost 15 years?
Oh, that's such a great question. I was publishing books for kids in between. So I was sort of in the publishing world, but it was a very different corner of the publishing world. The books are middle grade steampunk adventure novels. So like a very sort of like different corner of, but so much fun. And one of the things that I loved about writing those books was going to schools and libraries and talking to kids and getting kids excited about writing. But in terms of crime fiction, it really was very different. I think the biggest thing was that the social media had really changed the way books are publicized and marketed. And it was, in some ways, I think it was good for me. I live in a rural area. I can't just hop on a train and be in New York in 30 minutes. And so I think in a lot of ways, the social media has made it possible for authors to kind of get in on the crime fiction community from all different places around the country, and around the world. And I think that's been a really positive thing. I think it's opened our genre up to a lot of new people, which is something that needs to happen. So that was really different. I also think that it's interesting. There had sort of been this shift towards suspense in those years that that I was doing some other things, and I think that's exciting too. That like the lines between traditional mystery and suspense have blurred a lot, and there are a lot of books that you can kind of put in different categories now, and I love that. I love how everybody's pushing boundaries and kind of showing us new things that can be done in this genre. So all, a lot of changes, but really good ones to my mind.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I had an astute reader. The book, the Kate Burkholder book that was out last summer was titled Insider. And, it wasn't a mystery. You knew who the villain was, and you knew that the villain was coming for this person, this individual who was, had been involved in a crime. And, there was no mystery. And one of, I had a reader write to me and say, this is suspense. This is more of a thriller because there's no mystery to unravel. And so those lines do kind of get blurred, and they kind of, get mixed up a little bit. And I think that's kind of a good thing. You had asked earlier about, keeping a series fresh. I think that's another thing that we can add to that list, and sort of change. The focus of a mystery is finding out, sort of unraveling the mystery, and suspense. That's when you get into the whole danger element, and sometimes that's the way that they play out. So,
what can I ask Linda a question, John?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Question. Sure. I just thought of something. I love hearing about writing routines. Would you tell us a little bit kind of your it's funny, I was just reading an interview with Robert Harris, who's a writer I love, and he was saying that every year he starts the work in progress on January 15th and finishes it on June 15th.
Uh-huh. I just read that. I don't know where I read that, but I just read that somewhere.
So I find that fascinating. Like there's something about that that's just so fascinating to me. And like Lee Child's writing process, right? He just like decides on, I think for him, it's like April. He's just going to sit down one day and he's going to start the book, and my process is so much messier than that. And so I always love to hear from other people about, so what's your process?
I have a very boring process. I basically, I worked in the corporate world for many years before, I sold my first book probably back in 1999. And, before that I worked in the corporate world. So I'm kind of an 8 to 5 girl. And, I work basically all day. And, if I'm behind, I work maybe half days on the weekends or something like that. I think I may not be doing it right. I think I would like to set, instead of daily, hours, I would like to set a date. It would be so nice to be able to set that date, but it just seems like it always works out to where, my books, it'll usually take me a solid 9 months, 9 or 10 months to finish a book. It really does. No matter how hard I push, it just, how about you? How do you do it?
Yeah, I mean, mine is really, is really kind of all over the place. I think partly because I still have, my kids are 16, almost 13 and 11. And so, there's still, you know, I basically have the school day during the school year to write. So I have a sort of, 8 to 3 day. Right. But I really love to get like big concentrated chunks of writing in. I try to put in regular days, but I find that in order to really make progress on a book, I need to go and check myself into a motel or to a friend's house or something for 4 or 5 days and just like live in the world of the book for those days. Yeah. And I'll make huge progress during that time. And, I think it's that my house is fairly chaotic and there's a lot, the animals and the kids, and there's a lot going on. And I need to just be able to really think in the world of the characters for a few days and to just kind of live and not be interrupted by anything. Yes.
I am so intrigued. I've actually, Ann Stewart, who is a romance writer from, for years, she's written many, many beautiful books. She would check into a motel and she would spend 4 or 5 days writing the book. And she, I think the beauty of being able to do something like that is your everyday world sort of goes away for just a little while, and you're able to immerse yourself in the world that you're writing. And I think that is really a magical thing. I have not done that. Usually when I'm on tour, it's, things are just too busy to really work on the book, just a lot of travel involved and whatnot. I would love to try that. Check into a motel, even if it's just for, 4 days or something like that. And I mean, really immerse yourself in that world. I think you could, really get some quality writing done during that time. So I'm going to take that to my husband right away and let him know that I'm in a book.
I highly recommend it.
So Ziva wants to know, is it difficult to stay true to policy and procedure, whether it's Ireland or Amish principles when you're writing your books? And how do you know if you're getting it right? You touched on this a little bit with research, but let's start with Linda.
You mean in terms of just the cultural aspects or police procedure or?
Both, I think, yeah.
I'll tell you what, when I first started this series, I knew very little about the Amish. Every time I write a book, I learn something new. It's a very complex culture. It's a very old culture, and there's not a whole lot written down about it. And I would have to say that I've learned a lot of my stuff simply from the time that I spend in Ohio, sitting down with people and talking to Amish people. That's where I've really learned most of my stuff. John Hodstetler has put out a book, Amish Society. There are several editions. Each edition is, he adds to it and updates it. That has been very valuable to me. And, you just do the best you can. And as far as police procedure, if you can call on somebody who's sort of been there, done that, that to me is, somebody who has that kind of experience, that is really just invaluable to me as a writer.
Yeah, it's interesting because with this sort of cultural stuff, I early on decided that I knew that I wanted my main character to be an American in Ireland, that I wanted her to be experiencing Ireland as an outsider. And, in a way, I think that was sort of my fudge for, that I knew there was absolutely no way as a non-Irish person that I would get all of those nuances right. And, just the nuances of Hiberno English and the nuances of class in Irish society. There's just all these things that I knew. It was like, because I had lived there for a few years, I knew enough to know what I didn't know. And I knew enough to know what I would never know, I think, too. And so making my character an American who's experiencing this all, as an outsider, I think helps a lot, because I can sort of fall back on my own experience. And if she gets something wrong, it's first person, present tense. And she's kind of experiencing it and making mistakes in real time. And in terms of police procedure, I think, there's always such a line that we try to walk between knowing the proper policy and procedure and then often making decisions that go against that for the sake of the story, and for me, I think the goal is to know when I'm changing something, to know when I'm not representing it as it actually is, because the truth is that criminal investigation is a slow and laborious process. And if you really, when you really talk to investigators and they describe to you how long it takes for DNA evidence to come back and how long it takes often for autopsies to be completed because pathologists are just overwhelmed. And, there's all this sort of interesting detail there that I think we speed things up and we boil down and we crystallize for the sake of the story. Yeah. And, so I know that I'm making mistakes and I'm deviating from reality, but I guess my hope is that at least it'll come across that I know that I'm doing that,
Yeah. That's a great answer.
So Linda, Marge wants to know what attracted you to Ohio and Sugar Creek, and have you spent a lot of time there?
Well, Marge, how do you know about Sugar Creek? I'm originally from the western part of Ohio, sort of the Darke County area. Mm. And so I knew Ohio. I knew some Amish growing up, but I didn't really become really curious, wanting to know about the Amish until probably, a couple of years before that first book was released. I had taken a trip to Ohio. I was trying to, I wanted to write a breakout book. I had been writing romance for, probably, almost, 8 or 9 years. I had written several books for a couple of different publishers, and writing for 2 different publishers. You turn in the manuscript, your editor gives you feedback, and both of these editors at these publishing houses, they were basically telling me, Linda, these are romance novels. You really need to concentrate on the relationship between the hero and the heroine. Mm-hmm. So they were basically telling me that I need to stop killing people. And it was that point when I realized, I'm writing the wrong genre. I want to go full bore thriller, mystery, suspense. And so I started writing this book. I was just driven to write this book. And at about that time, I took a trip to Ohio with my brother-in-law and sister. He happens to live to have lived in the heart of Amish country. So we're at his 200-year-old farmhouse. There's, it's 10 below zero. There's 10 inches of snow on the ground. We're standing in the front yard telling our goodbyes. And what do I hear coming down the road? I hear the clip-clop of shod hooves. And I turned around and looked, and there was an Amish buggy coming down the road. And I thought about this big breakout novel that I had been working on, that novel that was missing something vital, that was really going to set it apart from the rest of the pack. And I thought, that's it. That is it. And so at that point, I sort of went back to Texas and I started rewriting. That's pretty much when Kate Burkholder came to be. I started researching the Amish. And since that cold winter morning when we were in Ohio, I've gone back to Ohio once or twice a year. And, whether I'm going for a book fair or I'm going for events or I'm going for a book tour, I always build in 1 or 2 days and try to get into trouble with some librarian doing research. So that's kind of where, how I know about that part of the country.
And so, Sarah, we mentioned in your bio that you had lived in Ireland in the 90s. Have you been back since?
Oh, yes. So I started going back pretty regularly, I guess about 8 years ago, around the time I started writing The Mountains Wild, or a little bit before. And I did some journalism, and then, the idea for this book had really had been in my head for 20 years, but I finally sort of felt like I'd figured out a way to write it. And so I did a few trips to kind of research that. And then, I try to get back there like at least once a year. My last trip was in 2019, of course, and I can't wait until I can get back. I'm anxiously, watching all the indicators and talking to friends and kind of, trying to get a sense of when it would make sense to do a trip. But the third book that I'm just finishing up is set in West Cork, and I spent some time there in 2019. So luckily, I sort of had what I needed in the can before the pandemic hit. And I've been able to work on that book this year, but I can't wait to get back. I'm dying to get back.
We understand.
So Linda, Ziva wants to know, will you be at the Buckeye Book Fair this year?
Yes, I will. I can't wait. That is actually the live event that I was telling you about earlier, John, right before we came on air. And to the best of my knowledge, it's going to be an in-person event. I'm very, very excited. So I'll probably, Sarah, like you, I mean, Ohio's different from Ireland, of course, but I am just looking forward to seeing people that I haven't seen for a long time. And I would love to be able to, do a little bit of research while I'm up there. And Buckeye Book Fair is always a fun deal. So I'll definitely be there.
So Ziva also wants to know, do either of you have any movie or television plans in the future with books? Let's start with Linda.
Okay. Well, you guys may know that back in 2013, we sold the rights to Sworn to Silence, and they did make a Lifetime movie. They retitled it An Amish Murder. Neve Campbell did a fabulous job as Kate Burkholder. And I can't really get into detail right now, but because I've not signed on the dotted line, but we're getting ready to sign the whole option thing again on with a big production company, and they do everything from big screen to cable series and stuff like that. So I have no idea what they have in mind, if they'll be able to get financing or anything like that. But there is a nice and exciting thing in the works. So hopefully I'll be able to put out some news soon.
Awesome. And how about you, Sarah?
Congrats. Yeah, as far as I know, there isn't anything in the works, but Ziva, if you're a movie producer and you're interested, don't hesitate to get in touch.
Bring it.
Right. Know where to find.
So Linda, did you actually get to meet Neve Campbell?
I did not.
Wow.
John, I would have so loved to have been up there. And they actually filmed in the rural areas around Toronto, Canada. And Noam Jenkins, one of the things that they really, really did right, they filmed in the dead of winter in January. It was really snowy, really cold. And the cinematography was just absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. And of course, Neve Campbell was really, really good. She is just such a fabulous actor. She did a wonderful job as Kate Burkholder. I would have loved to have been there, but it happened fast and I didn't have a chance to go. And so hopefully next time, if there is a next time.
That's exciting. So next question, is it difficult to put characters in danger knowing that they may not survive? Let's start with Sarah this time.
Oh, this I feel like a terrible person, but I love putting characters in danger. I mean, that's what's fun about writing crime. It's funny. I recently in the book that I'm working on right now, or just finishing up, for the first time ever, I think, I murdered somebody and then felt really guilty about it. And I think normally, every murder in a book, it feels really, like it has to happen for the plot, and the pieces all fit together, and it and for some reason, this one just got me. I felt terribly about it. But in general, I think that's what we're doing here. We're kind of connecting with our readers, and we're engaging our readers by making them feel that that sense of nervousness and that sense of what's going to happen to this character, and they're on the edge of their seat. And so yeah, I don't feel bad at all. Sorry.
I really have no problem with that, either. I mean, I don't think I've ever killed anybody in the books that I felt bad about. I don't know what that says about me as a person. I have actually known writers who are unable to hurt their characters. Yeah. But usually when when there is in a crime novel, usually there's a crime, many times that crime is a murder early in the book. That initial character, even though we build into those characters backstories and families and loved ones, and even though throughout the course of that mystery, they become people to us, they become characters, they were basically made to kill. And that is part of the story. And that's usually how I start the story, because the crime fiction, it all evolves around what happened to that character. If you're writing a murder mystery, and why it happened. And many times that information comes from that character's backstory. So, I kind of look at it, I think, more as a technical point of view. And if there is some outrage and regret involved, I try to put that on Kate Burkholder or John Tomasetti or one of the police officers in her her small crew of officers. And that's a really good way to vent. If you have that, sadness or regret, or, you just hate to kill somebody like that, let it come out through your characters. That's a good way to, especially if it's somebody who's, the victim is somebody who's sympathetic, even if they're imperfect and they, of course they didn't deserve it, but let that outrage come out through your characters.
Yeah. Okay. So next question, my caveat is you can't say each other's books, but what is something that you've read lately that you loved? Let's start with Linda.
Oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. Okay, so I just read Paul DeWarren's Dead by Dawn. I think it was Dead by Dawn.
That sounds right.
Dead Before Dawn or Dead by Dawn. Very, very good book. He writes a series about game warden in Maine, Mike Bowditch. And Mike really gets himself into a pickle in this book, and it starts from the get-go. And it's a series. This is you're probably going to get a little bit more as far as character backstories if you start from the beginning, but you can definitely pick up that book as a standalone and get a tremendous, it's just a tremendous, fun, exciting read, and you're going to be on the edge of your seat.
Yeah, and so funny. Sorry, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just going to say, I also just finished Dead by Dawn. Paul and I did an event together last week. And so I read it. It was like, the thing I said about it was that it starts, like it opens at 100 miles an hour and it never lets up. Like it just, and it's funny, I have not been reading a lot just because I've been finishing a book. But I have this huge pile of, there's so many good books. Many of them published today.
Yeah, I know.
Including yours, but like
Razor Blade Tears.
I'm so excited to read.
And Falling.
Did you? I just heard the NPR interview with TJ Newman about Falling, and it was fantastic. It just made me want to run out and grab the book. Yeah. It's a really good interview on Fresh Air. And Carol Goodman's new book, I'm so excited for also today. So yeah, I mean, I'm glad that I'm, we'll be coming to the end of my own book because there are a lot of books I want to read.
Oh yeah, we're gonna tear into them as soon as we finish what we're working on. We have so many great books to tear into.
I've got them lined up.
Today was a big new release. So you guys, so it sounds like you both read pretty widely in the mystery genre as well.
Oh,
Yeah,
yes.
I think so. Yeah.
I mean, as much as I can, it's funny. I find that, writing a book a year, there isn't as much downtime in there for reading as I would like sometimes. But
Yeah.
it's so important. When I'm stuck, there are books that I reread when I'm stuck on my own books, just to kind of, remind myself of what a functional structure looks like, when my structure feels dysfunctional.
Yeah.
There was a great crime reads piece a couple days ago about the books that writers reread, and Silence of the Lambs and The Secret History, and some of the ones that were mentioned are ones that I also kind of go back to. They're just some classics. Mystic River,
Yeah. I mean, sometimes sometimes it's good to read those. Just, for me, it's an escape. It's entertainment. It's pure entertainment. And I just love to read them. So I love to read writers who are just good. I learned so much from other writers, especially early in my career. I have to tell you, I mean, Sandra Brown, even, Nora Roberts, they were my idols, and I learned so much. Tammy Hogue is another one that I learned so much from them. So, but time is limited, and what better escape than to just jump into one of those wonderful, beautiful big mysteries. I just absolutely love it.
Awesome. Great. Well, I think that brings us to time this evening. So to recap for everybody who's been watching, if you joined us while the conversation was starting, we've been chatting with Linda Castillo, whose new book, Fallen, just came out today, and Sarah Stewart Taylor, whose newest release, A Distant Grave, just came out a couple of weeks ago. We will have signed copies of both of them within the next couple of days. So we dropped links early on in the chat. If you want to order, you can order those at murderbooks.com, or you can give us a call to order those. Sarah, Linda, thank you so much for chatting with us this evening. This has been wonderful.
John, thank you. We really appreciate you guys. Thank you very much.
Hopefully next time this year, we'll be able to actually do it in person. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for that.
Can't wait. Can't wait. Sarah, can't wait to meet you one of these days in person.
I know. It's such a pleasure chatting with you in this virtual space, and it'll be fun to
Always.
do it. Well,
Always.
Everything. Good. It's a terrific book, and I know it's going to be a huge success. So
thank you. And good luck with the current book that you're working on.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everybody.